If you'd told me at my wedding that the thing to nearly destroy my marriage would cost $3 at a pharmacy and fit in the palm of my hand, I would have laughed. A deep, full-bellied laugh, probably spilling champagne down my pristine white shirt. The irony would have been delicious. I am not laughing now. Well, mostly not. There's a hollow, brittle chuckle that escapes me occasionally, a dark echo of that imagined wedding day mirth. But it quickly dies in my throat, swallowed by the bitter reality. It started with me standing in my own kitchen, a domestic tableau of quiet suburban life at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. In my hand, I clutched a sleek matte black bottle of men's lubricant, its minimalist font screaming in a silent, accusatory way that it absolutely, categorically, 100% did not belong to me. Upstairs in the sanctuary of our bedroom, my wife, Kimberly, slept peacefully, apparently unbothered by the small, seemingly innocuous grenade she'd accidentally left in her handbag, its pin already pulled waiting to detonate. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Tonight we delve into a story where the quiet hum of domesticity gives way to the deafening roar of espionage. Grab your snacks, settle into your most comfortable chair, and remember this crucial truth. The people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves, to choose honesty, to walk the straight path. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you think and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here, especially when the truth hits harder than fiction. I'd been looking for the spare car keys. That's it. That's the entire impossibly mundane origin story of the day my life shattered. No flash of jealousy, no gnawing suspicion, no gut feeling of impending doom, no sudden blinding revelation, and certainly no dramatic sign from God. Just car keys. Mine had with irritating predictability fallen between the couch cushions, swallowed by the abyss of forgotten lint and loose change. And I had an early meeting with a particularly demanding parent at Eastfield High. A confrontation I was already dreading with the fervent energy of a man facing a root canal. I reached into Kimberly's familiar brown leather bag, which she always left casually on the kitchen counter, a fixture of our domestic routine. My fingers, accustomed to its contents, first brushed against her ever-present chapstick, then her work idea pack of Tic Tacs, and finally the reassuring jingle of the keys I was looking for. But then, deeper within my fingers closed around something foreign, a small matte black bottle with an austere minimalist font that, in the kind of tone only typography can achieve, communicated with undeniable certainty that it was absolutely not a woman's product. Not a hand cream, not a fancy perfume. This was explicitly, undeniably for men. I stood there transfixed for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only 10 seconds, maybe 15. The steady, hypnotic hum of the refrigerator filled the quiet kitchen, a counterpoint to the relentless tick-tock of the clock above the stove, each second stretching, expanding, filling with unformed questions. I turned the bottle over and over in my hand, my mind frantically cataloging its details like a detective, meticulously examining a piece of crucial evidence, which, as it would turn out, was precisely what I was doing, just without any of the training, the official badge, or the faintest, most terrifying idea of what I was actually holding.
Nah.
Don't overreact. Nolan whispered the reasonable, rational part of my brain, the part that clung desperately to the comforting illusion of our life. Name one innocent explanation. Retorted the other part, a colder, more methodical voice, the part that had apparently been quietly filing away every incongruous detail for the past 2 years like a very patient, very paranoid accountant. It had been building a case without my conscious knowledge, and now, presented with this indisputable Exhibit A, it demanded answers. I couldn't name a single one. So, with a sinking heart, I put the bottle back exactly where I found it, a futile attempt to rewind time to erase the discovery. Then, with a sudden surge of misguided determination, I went to the garage, retrieved the superglue from the third shelf behind the paint thinner, a shelf reserved for forgotten household repairs, came back inside, and executed the swap. It was a precise, almost surgical maneuver performed with the careful, almost theatrical precision of a man who had watched too many heist movies and was now deeply regretting not having paid more attention to the part where everything inevitably goes wrong. Did I think it through? I thought it through for approximately 4 agonizing seconds, and the sum total of my deliberation, fueled by a potent cocktail of shock and nascent betrayal, was this. Whoever is on the other end of this little situation is about to have a very uncomfortable evening, and I'm going to know about it without having to say a single word. It was petty, absolutely. In the moment, it was profoundly, darkly satisfying. But in hindsight, it was completely catastrophically, federally, and internationally stupid. I had no idea. None whatsoever. I made pasta that night, ate it mechanically, then went to bed, and slept like a man with a clean conscience. It's a specific, profound kind of sleep. The universe's cruelest joke reserved for those who are about to be proven deeply, irreversibly wrong. Let me tell you about Kimberly before I tell you what happened next. Because she deserves that. And because none of this twisted narrative makes a shred of sense without understanding the woman at its heart. Kimberly McCain was the kind of woman who simply by existing made you feel like you'd been doing everything in your life at about 60% capacity. Not in a cruel, judgmental way, but in a way that subtly, irresistibly made you want to run the extra mile, to read the extra chapter, to be the better version of yourself simply because she was looking and her standards, though quietly held, were devastatingly high. She was sharp and measured with an intellect that cut through pretense, and she was funny in that particular unforgettable way where the joke lands 3 seconds after she's already moved on to the next thought, and you're still standing there, a blissful idiot, laughing out loud while she's already deep in thought, perhaps reading something on her phone. We met at a professional development conference I had not wanted to attend over coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime in the previous decade, possibly even the one before that. She made a remark about the keynote speaker, a puffed-up academic droning on about educational paradigms that was so precisely surgically accurate in its dissection of his pomposity that I laughed louder than I'd intended, a booming sound that drew a few startled glances. She looked at me then with an expression that said, quite clearly, that she'd been waiting for anyone to truly get it. That was 11 years ago. I've been falling for her ever since, a continuous, delightful descent into love. She told me she worked at the Harwick District Courthouse as a legal compliance officer. It sounded important, demanding. Long hours, she'd often say, complicated cases, documentation. She couldn't discuss a work phone she kept entirely separate from her personal one. I respected it. I was a history teacher, for goodness sake. I spent my days explaining the intricate, often baffling nuances of the Missouri Compromise to 16-year-olds who would rather be doing literally anything else, preferably involving TikTok or video games. Her work sounded significant, impactful. I never pushed for details, content to let her professional life remain her own. What I understand now with a chilling clarity is that she had been counting on exactly that. My quiet trust, my unexamined acceptance. Yeah, but there had been things. Small things like pebbles in a shoe, barely noticeable at first, but accumulating, chafing. The laptop she angled away from me whenever I walked past its screen, a guarded secret. The calls she took in the garage at odd hours, her voice low, almost a whisper. The words clipped and indistinct as if she were speaking in code. The way she sometimes looked at me across the dinner table, an expression I could never quite read. It was something between love and guilt, an unsettling blend, and a third enigmatic thing I didn't yet have language for. I had filed all of it under "she's stressed at work," a convenient mental category, and kept moving, kept trusting. Because that's what you do when you believe you trust someone completely. You choose not to see. I had been choosing not to see for 2 long, blissful years. The bottle, small and innocuous, ended that arrangement with brutal efficiency. Day 1 after the swap. Nothing. Not a whisper. Not a tremor. Kimberly came home at 7 o'clock, exactly as always. She kissed me on the cheek, the familiar warmth of her lips. She made her customary cup of herbal tea. She asked about my day, listening with her usual attentiveness. We ate dinner, watched television with her feet tucked comfortably under her on the couch. Normal. Completely, infuriatingly, excruciatingly normal. My stomach churned with a mixture of dread and growing absurd hope that I had indeed manufactured a crisis out of thin air. Day 2. Also nothing. I started to seriously wonder if I was a paranoid idiot who had wasted a perfectly good Tuesday evening and an entire tube of superglue on a manufactured crisis. The relief was almost as unsettling as the suspicion. Little did I know day 2 was the last day of my old life. The final, oblivious sunset before a new, terrifying dawn. I just didn't know it yet. Ralph Lewis caught me in the hallway outside room 114 on day 2 morning, precisely 3 minutes before first bell. Ralph, who taught biology 2 doors down, had the uncontainable energy of a man who had consumed an entire pot of industrial-strength coffee and was desperately looking for somewhere, anywhere to put it. He possessed the social awareness of a golden retriever, which is to say absolutely none deployed with tremendous warmth. He stopped, abruptly pointed a stubby finger directly at my face and declared, "Something's wrong with you, Nolan." "Good morning, Ralph," I replied, attempting a professional, unbothered demeanor. "No, I'm serious. You've got a look." He squinted, his head cocked like a curious bird. "I don't have a look." I tried to laugh it off. "You absolutely have a look. It's the look where you know something but you don't know yet. If the knowing is good or bad." He tilted his head further, a goofy, insightful expression. "Kimberly, okay. Kimberly's fine, Ralph. Go teach something." I tried to dismiss him, my heart doing an uncomfortable little stutter step. He just pointed at me again as he backed away down the hallway. Still pointing, still watching me like a man filing evidence in his remarkably simple yet uncannily accurate mental database. I should have listened to Ralph. Ralph, as it turned out, was the only person in my immediate orbit who was exactly who he said he was, with no hidden depths or secret lives. There is something both profoundly comforting and deeply depressing about that realization. Day 3, 3rd period, 11:45 in the morning. I was mid-lecture on the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, a pivotal moment in history that is genuinely one of the most gripping, consequence-laden moments in modern history, if you tell it correctly. And I was telling it correctly, weaving a narrative of political intrigue and global domino effects, when Principal Donna Hartwell's voice, sharp and uncharacteristically tense, crackled over the classroom intercom. "Mr. McCain, could you please come to the main office? There are some people here to see you." All 26 juniors in my class immediately snapped to attention, their gazes fixing on me with that specific alertness that teenagers reserve for moments that seem like they might involve someone being in serious trouble. Their eyes were wide with a mix of morbid curiosity and nascent excitement. "Pages 140 to 155, I said, my voice betraying none of the sudden anxiety coursing through me. "There will be a quiz tomorrow." There was not going to be a quiz, but the threat, as always, bought me a precious 30 seconds of stunned silence. And right then, standing on the precipice of an unknown, I needed that silence more than anything. There were 2 of them in Donna Hartwell's office, both impeccably dressed in dark, expensive suits that proclaimed federal government as clearly as if the words had been intricately embroidered on their lapels in gold thread. Both men exuded a kind of stillness that wasn't relaxed or casual. It was trained, disciplined, unnerving. Donna herself was standing against the far wall, dwarfed by her potted fern, wearing the unmistakable expression of a woman who was very seriously reconsidering her entire career path. The taller one, with eyes that seemed to have witnessed too much, showed me a badge. FBI Special Agent Roland Briggs, Counterintelligence Division. He had the face of a man who had been delivering bad news professionally for so long that his default expression had permanently reconfigured itself into something that communicated with chilling efficiency. Whatever you're about to hear, I've heard worse, and I'm probably not going to feel any sympathy. Mr. McCain, he said, his voice a low rumble devoid of inflection. Please sit down. I'll stand, I replied, an instinctive, foolish attempt to assert some semblance of control in a situation where I clearly had none. Please sit down. He repeated the exact same tone, utterly devoid of suggestion. It was a command calmly delivered. I sat down. My knees felt suddenly weak. John, are you familiar? Briggs said, opening a thin, official-looking folder with federal evidence protocol regarding the handling of monitored personal items during an active counterintelligence operation. I looked at him, feeling utterly bewildered. I teach high school history. Yes, we're aware of what you teach, Mr. McCain, he said without looking up from the folder, his voice flat. Are you familiar with the protocol? No, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. He explained it then, slowly, clearly, and without any dramatic flair, which somehow made it significantly, terrifyingly worse. He spoke of a sophisticated counterfeiting syndicate, 18 months of intensive federal surveillance, an elaborate scheme involving defense intelligence being moved across state lines. Not in briefcases, but hidden inside seemingly innocent commercial lubricant bottles. Microfilm, he said. A tracker. A microdot capsule. The intricate high-stakes dance of the handoff. Saudi crossed the courier, collecting the bottle, an experienced operative, noticing the tamper within minutes, vanishing within the hour, the primary target going dark. 2 years of meticulous operational groundwork gone. He closed the folder with a soft thud that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. You did that? He asked, his gaze finally meeting mine, cold and accusing. The room was very quiet. Donna Hartwell appeared to be studying a point on the wall approximately 6 inches above my head with extraordinary, almost meditative focus. I want to ask about my wife, I said, cutting through the silence, my mind still reeling, but my primal instinct overriding the shock. Briggs and his associate exchanged a look, a brief, silent communication that had a full, complex conversation living inside it. Mr. McCain Briggs said, a subtle shift in his tone, a hint of something deeper. Don't. My voice came out steadier than I felt, laced with a desperation I barely recognized. Don't say my name like that. Don't give me the pause. Just tell me. Is she safe? Your wife, Briggs said carefully, each word a weighted stone, has been an employee of the Federal Bureau of Investigation for 9 years. The fern in the corner of Donna Hartwell's office, a detail I hadn't consciously noticed until that moment, had one single brown dying leaf at the very bottom. I stared at it for a moment, letting the words sink in, trying to reconcile them with everything I thought I knew. She's not a compliance officer, I stated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. No, she never was. Briggs confirmed, his voice devoid of judgment, just fact. No, 9 years. We had been married for 6. 6 years of domestic bliss built on a meticulously constructed foundation of lies. Is she safe? I asked again, the only question that truly mattered. Briggs looked at me for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. The kind a man gets when he realizes the person in front of him isn't going to fall apart. Not yet. Not in front of him. For now, he said, the caveat hanging heavy in the air. She's been pulled from the field. She's at the Harwick Federal Building. I nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. I looked at Donna Hartwell, who appeared to be silently praying for the sweet release of retirement, or perhaps simply oblivion. Cancel my afternoon classes, I said, my voice firm. I didn't know it yet, but I had just asked to be driven toward the first in a series of revelations that would systematically dismantle every assumption I had ever made about my own life, about my wife, about reality itself. The second revelation was waiting for me at the federal building. The third was buried deep in a file that an analyst named Priya Anand hadn't found yet. And the fourth, the one that would eventually put me in a rain-soaked parking garage in Clarksville, staring at a dead man, that one was still 3 weeks away. They drove me to the Harwick Federal Building in an unmarked car that smelled faintly of stale coffee, and overwhelmingly of institutional ambition. I sat in the back, the uncomfortable silence punctuated only by the hum of the engine, and watched Harwick go by through the tinted window. A world that suddenly felt alien and full of hidden layers. The diner on Clemens Street where Kimberly and I ate breakfast every Sunday, a ritual of normalcy. The park where we walked when the weather was good, hand in hand, sharing quiet moments. And the courthouse, the imposing brick edifice where she had never actually worked. And I did the thing I always did in moments of profound personal crisis. The only coping mechanism I truly possessed. I tried to find the historical parallel. I searched my vast mental archives desperately, seeking a precedent, a framework, a context for this impossible situation. I couldn't find one. History, for all its usefulness, for all its lessons, simply does not have a chapter on what to do when you discover that your wife of 6 years is a federal operative who has been living a double life, with the calm efficiency of a woman who has simply never found it necessary to tell you. The federal building itself had the anonymous, imposing energy of a place where incredibly important clandestine things happened in deliberately unimportant-looking rooms. Briggs walked me through a labyrinthian hallway that smelled of recycled air and muted bureaucracy. His stride purposeful, mine a bewildered shuffle. He stopped outside a door with a small reinforced window. Kimberly was sitting at a metal table on the other side. She wore the same gray blazer she'd worn to work that morning, a symbol of her carefully constructed civilian life. Her hands were flat on the table in front of her, not cuffed, indicating she wasn't a suspect. But there was something profoundly different about her posture. The performance was gone. All of it. The careful, curated ease she wore every day like a second skin, a masterpiece of quiet deception, had been taken off shed. And what was underneath was someone I both recognized completely down to the curve of her jaw, and simultaneously didn't know at all. She looked up then and saw me through the window. I don't have the right words for what moved across her face in that moment. I've spent 12 years finding language for human experience, for teaching teenagers the subtle nuances of motivation and emotion, and I still don't have it. It wasn't guilt, not entirely. It wasn't relief, not purely. It was something that looked like a person setting down something extraordinarily, impossibly heavy after carrying it alone for a very, very long time. Briggs opened the door. I walked in and sat across from her, the cheap metal chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. The door closed behind me with a soft thud, sealing us in. Silence. Heavy, thick, pregnant with unspoken truths. John. Then Kimberly said, her voice a fragile whisper. I'm sorry, Nolan. How long? I asked, my own voice hoarse, desperate for a timeline, a starting point for this impossible narrative. Since before we met, she answered, her gaze unwavering. Were we? I stopped, the words catching in my throat. I tried again, softer. Was any of it real? All of it, she said immediately, firmly, with an almost fierce conviction. Like she'd rehearsed this answer 1,000 times in her head, and it still hadn't gotten any easier to say. Nolan, all of it was real. Everything that was us was real. I need you to hear that before anything else. You lied to me every single day for 6 years about work, not about us." I countered, a bitter, broken laugh escaping me. It came out wrong, too sharp, too short, raw with pain. "That is a distinction you are going to have to walk me through very slowly, Kim, because from where I'm sitting right now, those two things are not as separate as you seem to think they are." "I know." Her voice broke on the second word, a fragile crack in her composure, and she pulled it back together with the kind of ruthless precision that told me she'd been pulling herself together under unimaginable pressure for a very, very long time. "I know what I took from you, Nolan. I'm not going to tell you it was okay because it wasn't. But I need you to know that I chose you every single day through every operation, every cover story, every closed door. I chose you. And there were days when choosing you cost me more than you'll ever understand." That last sentence whispered with a weight of unarticulated suffering. I filed it away without knowing why. It would matter later. It would matter enormously. "Tell me about the bottle," I said, pulling her back to the immediate crisis, the catalyst for this shattering revelation. She walked me through it. Her voice, calm, professional, yet tinged with a weariness I'd never heard before. The syndicate. The intricate microfilm operation. The controlled handoff she'd been running for months, a delicate ballet of deception. The lubricant bottle, not just a container, but a carefully selected piece of evidence tracked, embedded with surveillance strategically placed. The night of the exchange, she explained it was supposed to be the one-time glue. The syndicate's top handler, a ghost with no name and no record who had been operating invisibly for over a decade, was finally supposed to surface in person. One moment, one identification. The entire operation, 2 years in the making, hung precariously on that single fleeting instant. And then her history teacher husband had come along with a tube of superglue, and with an act of monumental accidental stupidity turned the whole thing into an artifact, a useless piece of tampered evidence. The courier noticed within minutes, Kimberly said, her eyes distant, reliving the moment. "Sadie Cross. She's experienced." She felt the weight difference, checked the seal, and disappeared into the night. The glue went dark within the hour. She paused, a heavy silence settling between us. "Roland is furious. Roland Briggs just told me I destroyed 2 years of federal work in my kitchen on a Tuesday night," I said, a dry, bitter humor coloring my voice. "Furious seems reasonable." "Nolan." She looked at me steadily, her gaze piercing. "I need you to know something. The reason I never told you, it wasn't only protocol. I was protecting you from what I demanded," the new mystery instantly piquing my fear. A pause. That same careful door closing behind her eyes that I'd seen once already in the federal building when I'd asked Briggs about the glue. "That's classified," she said quietly, her voice flat. "2 times now. 2 questions about the same shadow. 2 identical doors closing just a fraction too smoothly, too quickly. I was a history teacher, not an agent, not privy to the secrets of the intelligence world. But I'd spent 12 years teaching people how to read what isn't said, how to interpret the silences, the omissions, the subtle body language that betrays deeper truths. And what wasn't being said was filling the room, a palpable, terrifying presence. Yeah. Briggs came back in 20 minutes with analyst Priya Anand, a compact, precise woman in her early 30s who gave the immediate impression of someone who had read every single file in the building and remembered all of them with photographic clarity. She laid out the situation with the chilling efficiency of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. The syndicate now knew Kimberly's cover was compromised. They were watching her known associates. That, as she explained with an almost clinical detachment, meant me. "Witness protection is on the table," Briggs said, his gaze hard. Disappearing, starting a new life entirely is on the table. He paused, letting the weight of those options sink in. Or he continued, "You help us rebuild. We help you. How you're uncatalogued. They don't have your face, your voice, your profile anywhere in their databases. You're the one clean asset we have left." He let that sit for a moment, the implication hanging in the stale air. A history teacher from Harwick, Tennessee is the last person anyone would look at twice. That is genuinely the most backhanded compliment anyone has ever paid me, I said, a faint, disbelieving smile touching my lips. Briggs did not smile. I don't think Briggs had smiled since approximately 2009. "It's not a compliment, Mr. McCain." He corrected his voice as flat as a tabletop. "It's a tactical assessment." I looked at Kimberly. She was looking at the table again, that familiar habit she had when she was managing something she didn't want visible on her face. "Kim," I said her name a question. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine, raw and vulnerable. "Is this a good idea?" A long pause followed, the longest since I'd walked into the room stretching taut with unspoken implications. And then her voice barely above a whisper. "No, Nolan. It's a terrible idea." Another pause, shorter this time, but just as profound. "But I think you should do it," which was, I reflected, the most honest thing she had said to me in 6 years. And somehow, coming from her after everything, it was enough. I turned back to Briggs. "Tell me what I need to do." "Yeah." I didn't know it yet, but somewhere across town, in the quiet hum of the federal building's analytical wing, Priya Anand had already gone back to her desk and pulled up a secondary background thread on me. A routine procedure, she'd told Briggs. What she found on that thread, however, was anything but routine. She hadn't told Briggs yet. She was still staring at her screen, going very still, deciding precisely how to say it, how to unleash this new, unexpected variable into the already volatile equation. They sent me to the Hollow 3 days later. It was a safe house in rural Arkansas that looked from the outside exactly like what it was supposed to look like, a forgettable, dilapidated farmhouse 40 minutes outside of nowhere, with a gravel driveway leading to a porch light that flickered with a tired, intermittent pulse. Inside, however, it was significantly less forgettable. Inside it was 3 weeks of crash course tradecraft delivered by 2 instructors who communicated primarily through their sheer physical size and the occasional barely contained expression of professional disappointment at my civilian ineptitude. I learned how to surveil without being surveilled, how to make contact without leaving a trace, how to listen in a conversation for the thing beneath the thing being said, which, as it turned out, was not entirely unlike teaching teenagers who didn't want to be in class. You learned to read what the body was doing, what the eyes were saying when the mouth was performing a carefully constructed lie. "Ma." Ralph Lewis texted me 3 times during those 3 weeks. The first said simply, "Told you." The second, a few days later, was more concerned. "Donna told me about the FBI guys. You okay, man?" The third, surprisingly insightful, arrived just before I left the Hollow. "If you're in witness protection, you could have just said so, man. I would have understood." I did not respond to any of them. This was, professionally speaking, correct procedure. It was also emotionally the hardest thing I did in Arkansas. Kimberly and I spoke twice, short, monitored calls, each word weighed and filtered. She sounded like herself, careful and warm and funny in that devastating way that could make me laugh, even through the turmoil. But there was something underneath it all that was new. Or maybe it wasn't new. Maybe I was finally hearing something that had always been there now that I knew what I was listening for, now that my ears were attuned to the subtle dissonances. On the second call, right before she hung up, her voice a low murmur, she said, "Nolan, when this is over, I'm going to tell you everything. Every single thing. And then you can decide." Decide what? I asked, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Whether any of it changes anything? She replied, and then the line went dead. I thought about that for a long time, in the dark, echoing silence of the Arkansas farmhouse, about whether love, true deep love, can survive the discovery that the person you love has been a fundamentally different person than you thought, living a life entirely separate from the one you shared. About whether the map being wrong means the territory itself has irrevocably changed. About whether 6 years of real mornings and real dinners and real laughter, shared experiences woven into the fabric of our lives, can be retroactively made false by the existence of a separate parallel truth. I didn't have an answer, but I was going to Memphis to find one. Aldermore Antiques sat on a quiet, unassuming street in Memphis, like a building that had decided decades ago to simply outlast everyone around it, stoically enduring the tides of time. 3 floors of meticulously curated European antiquities, brass door handles gleaming under the soft, diffused light. The pervasive, comforting smell of old wood and even older money clinging to every surface. Karsten Mall had run it for 11 years, cultivating an image of legitimate enterprise that was so seamless, so meticulous about its surfaces that it became its own kind of truth. He was the kind of man who understood that the best cover is one that doesn't feel like a cover at all because it's mostly authentically true. I walked in on a Thursday afternoon wearing a jacket I didn't own and a backstory I'd memorized the way I memorize lesson plans, thoroughly, clinically, and with the specific cold dread of a person who knows that blanking in the middle will have immediate catastrophic consequences. Maul was behind the counter, a figure of elegant leisure examining a small, intricately sculpted bronze figure through a jeweler's loupe. He was exactly as described, mid-40s, immaculately well-dressed with the kind of refined handsome that comes with generations of money and an abundance of patience. He looked up when I came in, his movements polished, assessing me with an almost imperceptible ease. He had likely categorized and filed me away before I'd even taken 2 steps through the heavy oak door, looking for anything specific. He asked, his voice smooth, carrying just a trace of a German South African accent, like a subtle, intriguing perfume. "A friend recommended you," I said, enunciating each word carefully, sticking to the script. "Said you sometimes carry pre-war German cartography maps, survey documents, that kind of thing." A pause. So brief, so expertly executed, most people would have missed it entirely. I didn't. My newly heightened senses honed in the hollow, registered every nanosecond. "We occasionally do," he said, his gaze steady, assessing. "What period?" "Early 20th century." I replied, holding his gaze, a quiet challenge passing between us. "My area of interest is documentation of territorial changes post-1918. The kind that got reclassified." Another pause. This one lasted exactly the right amount of time, a subtle nod of understanding passing between us, a silent agreement that the game was now afoot. "Come back Saturday," he'd said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that seemed to belong to another era. "I may have something for you." I nodded slowly, my gaze drifting to the bronze figure still commanding its silent vigil on the cluttered mantelpiece. "Remarkable providence," I murmured, a genuine appreciation for the history it embodied. And then, without another word, I turned and walked out. The heavy door closed behind me with a soft thud, sealing in the secrets of that dusty, antique-laden room and releasing me back into the brisk chill of the city. Outside, the air felt sharper, the rumble of traffic, a sudden assault after the hushed interior. I walked 2 blocks each step, a deliberate release of pent-up tension, before instinctively turning a corner onto a quieter side street. There I leaned against the rough texture of a brick wall, eyes closed, and simply breathed. For perhaps 30 seconds, my lungs worked overtime, pulling in great gulps of the cold night air. An involuntary gasp for a man who had just defused an invisible bomb. The contact was made. The first precarious step taken. The dormant chain after months of agonizing stillness was finally irrevocably in motion again. Dull. Miles away, high above the bustling streets of Nashville, in the sterile glow of an FBI operations room, Roland Briggs stared intently at a flickering dot on a digital map. A barely perceptible movement. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor of hope stirred within his chest, loosening a knot that had been tightening for 3 excruciating weeks. The stakes were immense. The pressure crushing, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he allowed himself a fraction of relief. What Roland and his exhausted team didn't know, couldn't possibly fathom, was the parallel discovery made by Priya Anand. For 2 weeks, Priya had been wrestling with a truth far more profound, far more dangerous than anything they were tracking. She had unearthed it in a secondary background thread, a digital ghost in the machine, and had been agonizingly searching for the right moment, the precise way to deliver the devastating blow. That night, the night I returned from Memphis, shell-shocked and weary, Priya finally spoke. After my debriefing, after I'd been released to the cold comfort of my safe house and was midway through a tasteless regulation issue sandwich, my handler's urgent knock shattered the fragile peace. Briggs needed me now at the Nashville field office. The urgency in his voice was unmistakable. Now I found myself in a bare, fluorescent-lit briefing room facing Priya Anand. She sat across from me, her posture stiff, her face etched with a burden that seemed almost physical. She looked like a person who had carried a weight too heavy for too long, a secret that had pressed down on her every waking moment and had at last reached her breaking point. The moment she spoke, her voice measured, almost apologetic. The air in the room seemed to thicken. "Mr. McCain," she began, her eyes dark with a reluctant sympathy, "I need to ask you about your father." A jolt went through me, sharp and unexpected. My father was a closed book, a wound long scarred over. My father died in a car accident. I said, my voice defensive, almost a reflex. When I was 12. "Yes," she replied carefully, her gaze unwavering. "That's what the record says." The room fell into a profound silence, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights. The quiet was thick with unspoken truths, with the heavy implication that the record in this instance was a lie. My stomach twisted. "Before you became a teacher," she continued, pushing a manila file across the polished table between us, its thinness belying its explosive contents. "You worked as a government archivist fresh out of college for 14 months. "That's right." I nodded, the memory faint but accurate. That brief, almost forgotten chapter of my life. During those 14 months, you cataloged and handled a classified batch of defense documents. Documents that subsequently went missing approximately 6 weeks after your tenure ended. She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to sink in. The air grew colder, each word a chisel chipping away at my understanding of my own past. The syndicate known as the Glues Network has believed for 11 years that you either took those documents or that you know precisely where they are. That belief, Mr. McCain," she finished, her voice barely above a whisper, "is the entire reason this operation exists." Another chilling pause. The world tilted. 11 years. The Glues Network. And the sickening realization that my entire life had been unknowingly tethered to this shadowy belief. Then came the second, more brutal blow. Kimberly was originally assigned to get close to you and find out which. I cut her off with a sharp, involuntary intake of breath. I sat there, stunned, the words echoing in the sudden emptiness of my mind. 6 years. 6 years, and every shared laugh, every quiet evening, every intimate secret began with a mission. The conference, the deliberately bad coffee, the perfectly calibrated, subtly disarming remark about the keynote speaker. Every meticulously crafted detail was a lie. It had all been from the very first moment a job, a cold, calculated assignment. The betrayal was a physical ache, a fist clenching in my gut. "She fell in love with you," Priya said quietly, her voice softening as if she could see the precise moment my world imploded, reading the raw, desperate calculation on my face. She buried her original report. She never filed her findings. Priya's eyes, full of a compassion I wasn't ready for, met mine. "She's been protecting you from both sides, from us and from them, for 6 years. That's why she wouldn't tell you who Glue was. She knew that if you knew who he was, it would break something in you she couldn't fix." The pain of the betrayal warred with a sudden, overwhelming surge of understanding and a fragile, desperate gratitude. Kimberly. My Kimberly. "Who is he?" I asked, the words forced past the lump in my throat, a desperate plea for the final shattering truth. Priya didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly opened the file, her movements deliberate, almost reverent, and turned it toward me. I looked at the photograph for what felt like an eternity. It was a man, undeniably, unmistakably my father. He was 67, his hair streaked with more gray than I remembered. But then I didn't remember much. I'd been 12 when he died, 26 years ago or so, I believed. He looked utterly calm in the photo. Unhurried, his gaze level and piercing. But it wasn't the calm of peace or contentment. It was the absolute unyielding calm that comes from the unshakable certainty that you are without question the most dangerous person in any room you choose to enter. "Edgar Finch," Priya finally said, her voice dropping to a whisper, the name heavy with implication. "Known to his network as Glue." She paused again, letting the name hang in the air, a final, inescapable truth. "Your father, Mr. McCain." I said nothing. For the very long time, I said absolutely nothing. The revelation was too immense, too utterly devastating to process. My father, alive. A ghost who had walked among shadows, a criminal kingpin. My father was Glue. The documents I finally managed, my voice hoarse, a desperate anchor in the swirling chaos. "Where are they?" "We believe he hid them in a storage unit registered under your childhood home address in Harwick." Priya explained, her voice regaining a clinical edge, though her eyes remained on mine, watching. "He planted them there before he disappeared. Insurance. Against the government, against his own network, against anyone who might come for him." She closed the file, its soft thud a final punctuation mark. "He's been using your name as a shield for 26 years. The syndicate thinks you're complicit. The FBI has considered it. And the only person who has consistently, unconditionally maintained that you knew nothing was your wife." The words were a hammer blow. My name, a shield. My entire life, a cover for a ghost. And Kimberly. She had known. She had genuinely known that I hadn't known. And for 6 years, she had stood in the breach, a steadfast sentinel, protecting me from a truth that would have shattered my existence. That was the weight she'd been carrying, the silent sacrifice. That was what choosing me, truly choosing me, had cost her. "Okay," I finally said the word, a quiet surrender to the unimaginable. Priya looked at me, her expression a mix of relief and renewed resolve. "Okay," I repeated, my voice now firm, a nascent determination stirring within me. "Tell me how we finish this." Yeah. The final operation was a masterpiece of clandestine choreography. 9 painstaking days to set up, 40 minutes to execute. Maul, the initial contact, had served his purpose impeccably. His carefully timed disclosures pushing my name and profile higher and higher up the chain, from one intermediary to the next, until the request for a face-to-face meeting landed on the desk of a man who hadn't shown his face in years. And after all that time, after 2 decades in the shadows, he had apparently decided he finally wanted to see his son. Perhaps that tells you something profound about Edgar Finch. Perhaps in that one calculated, audacious choice, it tells you everything. The riverside parking structure in Clarksville was a monument to brutalism, a cold concrete labyrinth that reeked of exhaust fumes and the lingering dampness of an earlier rain. I stood on level 3, the bitter November wind whipping through the open bays at precisely 11:45 at night. A thin, uncomfortable wire chafed under my jacket, a constant reminder of the 2 FBI teams strategically positioned on levels 2 and 4. And I waited. Every nerve ending was alight, every sense hyper-aware. I had been told to expect a single contact. What I hadn't been told, what had been deliberately withheld from me, was that the contact would be him directly. That particular piece of information, I now understood, had been kept secret, because everyone involved had correctly assessed that I would have had, as they so clinically put it, significant feelings about it. Significant feelings felt like a grotesque understatement. He came alone, or at least appeared to. He emerged from the gloom at the far end of the level, a tall, imposing figure. I'd forgotten that about him, his height. Or perhaps at 12 I'd simply lacked the context to register it fully. He walked with an unnerving, unhurried ease, the silent glide of a predator for whom threat assessment was as natural as automatic as breathing. He stopped 6 feet away. His figure silhouetted against the distant city lights and looked at me. His expression was almost paternal, a chilling, unsettling approximation of warmth. "Nolan," he said, his voice deep, resonating in the cavernous space. "You're supposed to be dead." "I've been many things," I replied, my own voice surprisingly steady, the adrenaline a cold clarity in my veins. He almost smiled, a fleeting twitch at the corner of his lips. Dead was convenient for a while. 26 years of convenient. His gaze swept over me, a slow, appraising once-over. "You turned out well." He said it as casually as if we were discussing the weather, as if this were a normal observation between a father and son meeting for the first time in over 2 decades in a deserted parking garage surrounded by federal agents. "History teacher." "That's good. You always liked stories." "I teach history." I corrected him, refusing his facile categorization. "Not stories. There's a difference." He tilted his head slightly, a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture that conveyed a wealth of knowing amusement. "Is there?" he mused. "I found they're largely the same thing. The version that wins is merely the one with the most convincing narrator." The cynicism was absolute, unwavering. I pushed past it, determined to cut to the core. "The documents are in the storage unit on Kellner Road," I stated, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "The FBI already has them. It's done." Something shifted in his expression. Not panic, not even surprise, not truly. It was more like the subtle resignation of a master chess player who had been deeply engaged in a very long, complex game, only to watch the board suddenly tip, spilling pieces in disarray. He had been outmaneuvered. "She told you," he said quietly, his gaze piercing. "She protected me." I countered the dam, breaking the raw emotion finally surfacing. "For 6 years. From you, from your network, from the people who thought I was part of this. She stood between me and all of it. And she never told me because she knew it would." I stopped, steadied myself, forcing the words back down. "It doesn't matter. It's over." A long silence descended, broken only by the distant rhythmic patter of rain on the concrete outside, and the faint, mournful sound of the river winding through the city. "I wondered when you'd find your way here," he said, finally, his voice carrying an almost wistful echo. The line was delivered with the effortless grace of a man who had been saving it, polishing it, waiting for the perfect moment to deploy it. I recognized the instinct immediately. It was mine. The perfectly timed remark, the calibrated exit line. I'd apparently inherited it. "I know," I said, meeting his gaze squarely. "That's why I came." I took a deliberate step back. From the deeper shadows on either side, 2 FBI agents emerged, their presence sudden and definitive. Edgar Finch Glue, the man to whom nothing had ever stuck, slowly raised his hands. There was no defiance, no struggle, only the profound calm of someone who had always known this was the only ending available and had merely been postponing it. Then from the shadows to my left, where she had absolutely no authorization to be, Kimberly stepped out. She wore a jacket I recognized instantly from our closet at 11 Briarwood Drive, a familiar, comforting detail in the stark, surreal tableau. Her eyes, filled with an emotion I had no name for, lingered on the man now being cuffed. Her gaze intense, unblinking. He looked back at her, a faint, almost imperceptible acknowledgement passing between them. "You broke protocol," he said, his voice low, his eyes still holding hers. "Coming here. I broke protocol the day I filed a false report to protect your son," she retorted, her voice clear and strong. This, she gestured vaguely at the scene around them, seemed relatively minor by comparison. He almost laughed, a genuine, full-throated laugh that caught in his throat, dying before it was truly born. Almost. Then Briggs was there, his presence brusque and efficient, and the moment the fragile, profound connection between a father, a son, and the woman who had protected them both was over. Edgar Finch, the architect of a shadow empire, was walked toward a waiting, unmarked vehicle, his steps careful, unhurried, like a man going somewhere he was never going to leave. Kimberly stood beside me, her shoulder brushing mine, and together in shared silence, we watched until the vehicle disappeared into the night. Sati Cross. I said their name, emerging almost as a question, a final piece clicking into place. She was his the whole time, from the beginning. Kimberly nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the empty space where the car had been. She never actually disappeared. She walked straight back to him and told him the operation was compromised. A slight pause, heavy with unspoken implications. He spent 2 weeks deciding whether to run or surface. She met my eyes. He surfaced because of you. He wanted to see me. He wanted to see his son. Yes, I thought about that. About a man who had faked his own death, meticulously built a criminal empire, and remained utterly invisible for 26 years, then walked into a parking garage because he wanted to look at his son. I thought about whether it said anything at all. History, I had told my students 1,000 times, is not simply a collection of facts. It is fundamentally a collection of choices. And every choice, no matter how deeply buried, no matter how skillfully concealed, inevitably leaves an indelible mark on everything that comes after it. I was going to have to figure out what to do with that. Edgar Glue Finch was arrested, processed, and ultimately charged with 11 federal counts, including espionage, racketeering, and conspiracy. Nothing had stuck to him for 26 years. Now everything stuck. The classified defense documents were recovered from the storage unit on Kellner Road, precisely where Priya Anand had said they'd be a testament to her meticulous intelligence work. Nolan McCain, me, was formally cleared of all suspicion issued. What amounted to a federal apology delivered in the brusque, efficient tone of someone who was very sorry, but also, quite frankly, fairly busy. Kimberly resigned from the FBI 2 weeks after the arrest. She didn't make a dramatic announcement, didn't seek fanfare or recognition. She simply came home to 11 Briarwood Drive on a quiet Wednesday evening, placed her bag on the kitchen counter with a soft thud, and made tea. We sat at the kitchen table for a long, long time. Two people who had been lying to each other for entirely different, entirely devastating reasons. Two people who had chosen each other repeatedly, and at considerable cost, even when they couldn't utter the words aloud. "I need to ask you something," I said, finally breaking the comfortable yet still fragile silence. "Okay. The conference, where we met. The bad coffee. The remark about the keynote speaker. I looked at her, searching her eyes. Was any of that at the start? Was any of that at the assignment? She was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting to the steam rising from her teacup. The conference was the assignment. She said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. Everything after the first 30 seconds was not. What happened after 30 seconds, I asked, my heart hammering a sudden frantic rhythm. You laughed, she said, a small, complicated smile playing on her lips, a mixture of memory and raw emotion. Too loud, completely unguarded, like nobody was watching. And I thought she paused, the smile deepening, morphing into something wistful and profound. I thought, that man has no idea how to be anyone other than exactly who he is. And I hadn't been around someone like that in so long, I didn't know what to do with it. The kitchen was very quiet. Then the only sound, the distant, muted hum of Harwick going about its evening. On the counter, next to Kimberly's discarded bag, sat a small, matte black bottle with minimalist font. I didn't know how it had gotten there. I didn't ask. Maybe Kimberly had put it there deliberately. Maybe it was a reminder, a private joke. Maybe it was her particular devastating sense of humor finally surfacing after 6 years of careful, calculated management. Neither of us moved it. Neither of us laughed. But almost. Almost we did. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.